There is a candle on a windowsill in Medellín, Colombia. A grandmother named Luz Marina lights it every night at 8 o'clock. She has done this for 31 years. The candle is for a man named Pablo Escobar. He killed 4,000 people. He flooded the United States with cocaine. He blew an airliner out of the sky and killed 107 strangers. And every night, in a neighborhood he built with his own money, an old woman lights a candle for him and prays. I stood in that doorway in 2019. My name is Blackwell. I have been chasing the paradox of power for 20 years, and the candle in Luz Marina's window is the question I cannot stop asking. Not because I want to forgive Pablo Escobar, I do not, but because the candle is real, and the houses around it are real, and the children who grew up safe in those houses are real, and they are the grandchildren of a monster, and they are alive because of him. This video is about 6 monsters. 6 of the worst human beings who ever drew breath. And it is about the gifts each one of them left behind. Gifts that are still standing today. Gifts you can touch, walk through, read, sing, drive, cure your child with. Every gift was bought with blood. Every gift is real. And history will not let us simply throw the gifts in the fire because we hate the men who gave them. This is not an apology. I am not here to redeem anyone. I am here to put the ledger on the table and read both columns. The bodies. And what was built on top of the bodies. Because that is the part of history nobody wants to teach you. They want you to pick a side. The monster is a monster. The saint is a saint. But the truth is the same hands built the school and signed the death warrant. The same brain wrote the religious freedom law and ordered the city burned. The same heart that fed the slum poisoned the city. 6 monsters, 6 gifts. Every gift still standing today. Sit with that. Because by the end of this hour, you will have to decide what you do with a candle that is still burning. The first man on this list was born in the Caucasus Mountains in 1878. His name at birth was Yosif Vissarionovich Djugashvili. The world remembers him as Stalin. He killed 20 million people. The number is contested. Some historians say 15, some say 27. The archives in Moscow, opened briefly in the 1990s before they were closed again, suggested the real number sits somewhere around 20. The Holodomor in Ukraine, the Great Terror of 1937 and 38, the Gulag system, the deportations of the Chechens, the Tatars, the Volga Germans, the shooting cellars of the NKVD, the frozen camps of Kolyma where men dug gold out of permafrost with their fingernails. And in the same 40 years, the same man, signing the same kind of decrees with the same pen, taught 100 million people how to read. In 1917, when the Bolsheviks took power, the Russian Empire was a peasant ocean. According to the imperial census of 1897, only 28% of the population could read. 28. The vast majority of Russian peasants signed their names with a thumbprint. Women in the villages had a literacy rate of 13%. In Central Asia, in the steppes of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the rate dropped to 2%. 2%. A continent of people who could not read the price of bread. In December 1919, Lenin signed the decree on the liquidation of illiteracy. The Russian word for it is likbez, likvidatsiya bezgramotnosti, the liquidation of ignorance. Every citizen of the Soviet Union between the ages of 8 and 50 was legally required to learn to read. The state would provide the teachers. The state would provide the books. The state would provide the time off work. If the local Soviet did not comply, the local Soviet would be replaced. When Stalin consolidated power after Lenin's death in 1924, he inherited the Likbez program, and he did something nobody expected. He doubled it. Then he tripled it. The numbers are documented. Sheila Fitzpatrick, in her book Education and Social Mobility in the Soviet Union, lays out the data from the Soviet census of 1939. By that year, 12 years into Stalin's reign, the literacy rate of the Soviet Union had reached 87%. From 28 to 87 in 22 years. There has never been anything like it in human history. China would later attempt the same thing under Mao and reach a similar number, but it would take them longer. The Soviet literacy campaign, as a single act of mass education, remains the largest and fastest in the history of our species. Schools were built in villages that had never seen a building made of brick. In the Caucasus, where my own great-grandfather lived as a shepherd, a schoolhouse appeared in 1929. He learned to read at the age of 43. His teacher was a 19-year-old girl from Leningrad who had volunteered to spend 2 years in the mountains. She taught my great-grandfather the Cyrillic alphabet on a slate. He taught her how to slaughter a sheep. They wrote letters to each other for the rest of their lives. That is one part of the ledger. The other part of the ledger is this. The same year my great-grandfather learned to read, 1929, Stalin began the campaign of dekulakization. The kulaks were the slightly wealthier peasants, the ones who owned a cow, a horse, a small plot. They were declared enemies of the people. 2 million of them were deported to Siberia. Tens of thousands were shot in the back of the neck in cellars in Smolensk and Voronezh and Rostov. Their children were left to starve in train cars on sidings in the taiga. The cars were never connected to engines. They simply sat there. The children inside simply died. Then came the famine of 1932 and 33. The Holodomor in Ukraine, 3 to 7 million dead. The grain was confiscated. The borders of Ukraine were sealed. People who tried to walk to other Soviet republics looking for food were arrested and sent back to die. Cannibalism was so widespread that the Soviet authorities printed posters in Ukrainian villages reading, "To eat your own children is a barbarism." Then came the Great Terror of 37 and 38, the NKVD lists, the night arrests, the black cars on the side streets of Moscow at 3 in the morning, the Lubyanka basement, the Butovo shooting range outside Moscow where, in 14 months, 20,000 people were executed and buried in trenches. They are still being exhumed today. The skulls all show the same wound, a single bullet behind the left ear, standardized, industrial. Like the production line of a factory. And while this was happening, in every city, in every village, in every gulag camp even, schools were operating. Children were learning to read. Adult education classes were running on Tuesday and Thursday nights. The Red Army taught its conscripts to read in basic training, and a soldier who entered illiterate left literate 2 years later. By the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union had the highest combat literacy rate of any army on Earth. American GIs noticed it. Russian privates were reading newspapers in the trenches. They were writing letters home in Cyrillic copperplate. They were reading the works of Pushkin and Tolstoy in the dugouts of Stalingrad. Joseph Stalin died on the 5th of March, 1953, at his dacha in Kuntsevo, outside Moscow. He had a stroke during the night. His personal guards heard him fall, but they had standing orders never to enter his bedroom uninvited. They stood in the hallway, listening to him gurgle and rasp on the floor for 14 hours before anyone dared open the door. By the time the doctors arrived, he was beyond saving. He died slowly over 4 days, paralyzed down one side, unable to speak. Pravda announced his death in mourning black. The death notice was printed in 12 languages, and every literate adult in the Soviet Union, all 140 million of them, read it. Most of them had been taught to read by the same regime that was now telling them their father was dead. There is a phrase the children of the Likhbez used to repeat. The first thing they ever read was the alphabet. The second thing they ever read was the alphabet. The second thing they ever read was a denunciation of their own father. The state taught them to read so the state could use them as witnesses. And yet, they could read. And their children could read. And their grandchildren, my generation, could read Solzhenitsyn and Mandelstam and Akhmatova and Grossman and could finally understand what had been done to them. The literacy that Stalin built became the weapon that destroyed his memory. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 in part because too many people could read what had been hidden from them. That is the ledger of Joseph Stalin. 20 million dead, 100 million literate. Both numbers are true. Both numbers are still here. The mass graves at Butovo, the libraries in Tashkent, both still standing. Henry Ford was born in Dearborn, Michigan in 1863 on a farm he hated. He hated the cows, he hated the mud. He hated his father's hands, calloused and useless, working dawn to dark for nothing. As a boy, he took apart a pocket watch and put it back together, and that was the moment he decided his life would not be agriculture. His life would be machines. On the 5th of January, 1914, in the offices of the Ford Motor Company in Highland Park, Michigan, Henry Ford announced that the minimum wage in his factories would be $5 a day. The newspapers printed it the next morning in letters 2 inches tall. $5 a day. The previous wage had been $2.34. Ford had more than doubled it overnight. The reaction was earthquake. The Wall Street Journal called it economic suicide. Other industrialists called Ford a traitor to capitalism. Within 24 hours, 10,000 men were standing outside the gates of Highland Park in the snow, hoping to be hired. Fire hoses were turned on the crowd to keep them from rushing the doors. Ford did not care. He had calculated something nobody else had calculated. If a man earning $2 a day cannot afford to buy the car he is building, the car has no future. But if a man earning $5 a day can buy that car on credit, then every worker in America becomes a customer. Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line. He invented the consumer. The $5 day created the American middle class. It is not exaggeration, it is mechanism. Within a decade, the wages Ford paid had been matched by General Motors, by Chrysler, by U.S. Steel. The American working man went from peasant to homeowner in 20 years. He bought a Model T, he bought a refrigerator, he bought a radio. He sent his children to high school for the first time in the history of his family. The standard of living of the American factory worker between 1914 and 1929 doubled, then doubled again. By 1928, 60% of American families owned a car. In Britain, it was 4%. In France, it was 3%. The difference was Henry Ford. That is one column of the ledger. The other column begins in 1918, when Henry Ford bought a small failing newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. He printed it on a press in his factory. He distributed it through Ford dealerships. Every man who bought a Model T was handed a copy of the Independent for free. By 1925, the paper had a circulation of 900,000. It was the second largest newspaper in the United States, and every issue, for 7 years straight, attacked the Jews. The series was called The International Jew. It ran for 91 consecutive weeks. It accused Jewish financiers of starting World War I. It accused Jewish bankers of controlling Wall Street. It accused Jewish musicians of corrupting American youth with jazz. It reprinted, as fact, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forgery written by the Tsarist secret police. The Independent told its readers the Protocols were genuine. The Independent told its readers the Protocols were a roadmap of the global Jewish conspiracy. The articles were collected and published as a 4-volume book under Ford's name. The book sold 500,000 copies in the United States. It was translated into 16 languages. It was printed in Germany in the early 1920s. A young Austrian veteran named Adolf Hitler read it. Hitler kept a framed photograph of Henry Ford on his desk in his office at the Brown House in Munich. He said so to a reporter from the Detroit News in 1931. He told another visitor that Ford was his inspiration. In Mein Kampf, written in Landsberg prison in 1924, Hitler named only one American by name in the entire book. He named Henry Ford. He praised Ford as a single great man standing against the Jewish financial conspiracy in the United States. In 1938, on Henry Ford's 75th birthday, Adolf Hitler awarded him the Grand Cross of the German Eagle. It was the highest decoration the Third Reich gave to foreigners. Ford accepted it. There is a photograph of him receiving it in Dearborn from 2 German diplomats. He is smiling. Henry Ford died on the 7th of April, 1947, of a cerebral hemorrhage at his Fair Lane estate. He was 83 years old. The power had failed in a storm that night. He died by candlelight, in a house lit the way his grandfather's farmhouse had been lit, the world he had spent his life trying to escape. The Ford Motor Company is still the second largest automaker in the United States. The $5 day is still taught in every economics textbook. The Dearborn Independent is still cited by every neo-Nazi forum on the modern internet. Both are the legacy. Both are still here. The man who paid you enough to live also taught the man who would later try to wipe out a people from the earth. The same hands signed both checks. Genghis Khan was born Temujin on the banks of the Onon River in the year 1162. His father was poisoned by Tatars when Temujin was 9 years old. His mother was abandoned by the clan with 5 children and no animals. They survived that winter by digging marmots out of frozen ground and eating roots. Temujin's first kill, at the age of 14, was his half-brother Begtar, who had stolen a fish from the family. Temujin shot him with an arrow in the back. He told his mother he had done it because Begtar would have grown up to kill him first. His mother beat him with a leather strap and called him an animal. By the year 1206, that animal had unified every Mongol tribe on the steppe. He was given the title Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. He was 44 years old. He had 31 years of life left. In those 31 years, he and his sons and his grandsons would conquer the largest contiguous land empire in human history. 12 million square miles, stretching from the Sea of Japan in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, from the Siberian forests in the north to the Indus River in the south. The death toll is estimated at 40 million. The number is from Steven Pinker, citing demographic studies of the Persian and Chinese populations before and after the Mongol conquests. The population of the world dropped between 1206 and 1279 by approximately 10%. It is the only military campaign in human history that visibly altered the global atmosphere. So, the population of the world dropped between 1206 and 1279 by approximately 10%. It is the only military campaign in human history that visibly altered the global atmosphere. So, many forests were left to grow back over abandoned farmland. That ice core samples from Greenland show a measurable dip in atmospheric carbon dioxide in the 13th century. Genghis Khan cooled the planet by killing enough people that the trees came back. The methods were industrial before industry existed. When a city resisted, the entire population was killed. Not a metaphor, not a percentage, every single person. Merv, in modern Turkmenistan, in 1221. The Mongol army arrived. The city surrendered. The Mongols accepted the surrender, ordered the population to march out onto the plain, and then killed them for 13 days. Each Mongol soldier was given a quota of 300 people to execute personally. The historian Juvayni, who visited the ruins 40 years later, counted 1,300,000 corpses still visible. Nishapur, the same year. The skulls of men, women, and children were stacked in 3 separate pyramids on the city's outskirts. The pyramids were still standing 2 centuries later when Tamerlane rode past them and decided to imitate the practice. That is the death column, 40 million. The other column is harder to talk about because it requires you to admit something the textbooks do not want to teach you. Genghis Khan invented religious freedom. The Yasa was the legal code of the Mongol Empire. It was not written down in Genghis Khan's lifetime. It was held in the memory of his judges and his sons. The fragments that survive, preserved in Persian and Arabic chronicles, contain a clause that has no precedent in human law. Under the Yasa, every religion practiced inside the Mongol Empire was equal. A Buddhist monk paid no taxes. A Christian priest paid no taxes. A Muslim imam paid no taxes. A Jewish rabbi paid no taxes. A Taoist sage paid no taxes. A shaman paid no taxes. The clergy of every faith, recognized or unrecognized, had the same legal status. To attack a holy man of any tradition was a capital offense punishable by execution. This was 1225. In Europe the same year, Pope Honorius III was preaching crusade against the Cathars in southern France. The Albigensian massacres at Béziers had killed 20,000 civilians 15 years earlier on the order, attributed to the papal legate, "Kill them all." God will know his own. In the Islamic caliphates, conversion or jizya tax. In Confucian China, official suspicion of foreign religions. Nowhere on earth did the law say that a man's faith was his own business. Nowhere except inside the empire of the man who had killed 40 million people. Marco Polo, arriving at the court of Kublai Khan in 1275, was astonished. He wrote that he saw in a single hall a Christian priest, a Buddhist monk, a Muslim astronomer, a Jewish doctor, and a Taoist alchemist, all in the personal employment of the great Khan. The Khan listened to all of them. The Khan married women from each faith. The Khan ordered that his grandsons be raised in the languages of all the conquered peoples. The Silk Road was reopened. A merchant could ride from Venice to Beijing without crossing a single border. The currency was paper. The roads were patrolled. The bandits had been exterminated, often by the simple method of executing every member of the bandit clan, including the children. It was called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. It lasted approximately 100 years. It was the first global trade network. It is the reason gunpowder reached Europe. It is the reason paper money was invented in the West. It is the reason Marco Polo's book existed, the book that put the idea of Asia into the European imagination, the book that Christopher Columbus carried with him on the voyage that would, eventually, in a chain of consequences, lead to this language we are speaking right now, being spoken in North America. Genghis Khan died in August of 1227 during the campaign against the Western Shah in modern Ningxia. The cause is disputed. Some sources say he fell from his horse. Some say he was wounded by an arrow. Some say a Tangut princess, captured as a concubine, killed him with a knife on his wedding night. His funeral procession traveled north for 40 days back to the Mongolian heartland. Every living thing the procession encountered, every shepherd, every merchant, every traveler, was killed to keep the route a secret. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. A river was diverted over the grave to hide it. 1,000 horses were ridden over the ground to obliterate the tracks. The grave has never been found. It is still being searched for with satellite archaeology and ground-penetrating radar in 2024. The greatest killer in human history wrote the first law guaranteeing that a Christian, a Muslim, and a Buddhist could pray side by side. The two facts sit on the same table. They cannot be separated. They will never be separated. The grave is gone. The law is still here. Mao Zedong was born in Shaoshan in Hunan province in the winter of 1893. His father was a tight-fisted peasant who beat him. His mother was a Buddhist who could not read but who memorized the sutras. He hated his father. He worshipped his mother. He left home at 17 with a notebook full of Confucius and a single change of clothes. He starved 45 million people. The Great Leap Forward between 1958 and 1962 was the largest man-made famine in human history. The number 45 million is from Frank Decatter's archival work in the Regional Communist Party records, published in 2010. Some historians give a lower number, 30 million. Some give higher, 55 million. The mechanism is documented. Mao ordered the peasants to abandon their farms and smelt iron in backyard furnaces. The grain was left to rot in the fields. The grain that was harvested was confiscated and sold abroad to prove that China was a successful socialist economy. Villages were given quotas they could not meet. When they did not meet them, the local cadres beat them, hung them by their thumbs, buried them up to their necks, until they confessed to hoarding grain. There was no grain to hoard. The cadres would then take the seed grain, the grain set aside for next year's planting. Whole counties starved, whole provinces. Children too weak to cry, old people lying in doorways, mouths open, waiting. Cannibalism was reported in every province of central China. Husbands ate wives. Mothers ate their own dead infants. There are court records from Anhui province from 1960 that document, in case after case, families digging up corpses from cemeteries to eat them. The Great Leap Forward was Mao's personal project. He had been warned. His own Minister of Defense, Peng Dehuai, wrote him a private letter in 1959 telling him people were starving. Mao had Peng arrested, denounced, and beaten to death in prison 8 years later. 45 million people died because Mao did not want to be told he was wrong. That is one column. The other column begins in 1965, while the Great Leap was still casting its shadow across the Chinese countryside. Mao gave a speech to the Ministry of Health. He said the medical establishment had become an urban elite that ignored the peasants. He ordered a new program. Young people with 6 months of basic medical training would be sent to the countryside as paramedics. They would carry a small kit, antibiotics, vaccines, bandages. They would not wear shoes. They would walk barefoot from village to village like the peasants they served. The press named them the Barefoot Doctors, Qi Jiao Yisheng. By 1977, there were 1,800,000 barefoot doctors in China. Each one served a village or a small commune. They vaccinated, they delivered babies, they treated dysentery and tuberculosis and smallpox. They distributed oral rehydration salts. They organized clean water campaigns. They taught women about contraception and sanitation. The infant mortality rate of China in 1949, when the communists took power, was approximately 200 deaths per 1,000 live births. 2 out of every 10 Chinese babies died before their first birthday. This had been the reality of Chinese rural life for 2,000 years. By 1980, after 15 years of the Barefoot Doctors program, the infant mortality rate had fallen to 50 per 1,000. By 2020, in the same villages, it was 7 per 1,000. The arithmetic of those reductions, applied across the population of China over 6 decades, comes to approximately 100 million children who would have died but who lived. The World Health Organization, in 1978 at the Alma-Ata Conference, declared the Barefoot Doctors program the single most important advance in global public health of the 20th century. The conference declaration, called Health for All by the year 2000, was modeled on the Chinese system. Africa adopted it, Latin America adopted it, India adopted it. The lives saved across the developing world from the model that Mao Zedong launched in his speech in 1965 are uncountable. Conservative estimates put the number at 500 million human beings who lived past the age of 5 because, in some chain of consequence, a young man in a faraway village was given 6 months of training and a leather satchel and told to walk to the next hamlet. Mao died on the 9th of September 1976 of complications from Lou Gehrig's disease in Beijing. He was 82. His body was embalmed by Vietnamese specialists who had embalmed Ho Chi Minh. He is still on display in a glass case in Tiananmen Square. A line of Chinese tourists files past him every morning. Some of them weep. Most of them are silent. Some of them, in the older generation, remember that they ate bark and grass in 1961 because of him. Some of them, in the younger generation, remember that their grandmother survived childbirth because of the barefoot doctor who walked into her village in 1968 with a clean pair of forceps and a bottle of penicillin. Both groups stand in the same line. Both groups buried family because of the same man. Leopold II of Belgium was born in Brussels in 1835. The second son of a small king of a small country. He grew up envious of the British Empire. He used to say to his court, "Every other king has an empire, I want one too." He was small, vain, paranoid, and possessed of a pathological energy. He worked 16 hours a day. He had no friends. His wife despised him. He visited prostitutes weekly into his 70s. He killed approximately 10 million Africans. The mechanism is so well documented that it is the standard case study in every modern course on colonial atrocity. Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghost, published in 1998, lays out the full record. Between 1885 and 1908, Leopold II owned the Congo Free State. Owned it, personally. Not Belgium, him. It was the only colony in modern history that was the private property of an individual human being. 80 times the size of Belgium, 20 million inhabitants when he started, 10 million when he finished. The product was rubber. The bicycle craze of the 1890s and the automobile boom of the early 1900s had created an insatiable global demand for natural rubber. The rubber vines of the Congo were the largest source on Earth. Leopold's solution was simple. Each village was given a rubber quota. If the quota was not met, the village was punished. The punishment was the severing of the right hand, the hands of men, women, and children. The hands were collected in baskets and sent up the river to the Belgian officers as proof that the soldiers had been doing their job. There are photographs. They are not from the imagination. There is a famous one of a man named Nsala from the village of Wala. He is sitting on a porch. In front of him, on the wooden boards, is a small severed hand and a small severed foot. They belonged to his 5-year-old daughter. The Force Publique, Leopold's private army, had killed her and eaten her, then left the hand and foot for him as the receipt for the missed quota. That is one column. 10 million dead, 2 million more maimed. The other column is in Brussels, and it is still standing. Leopold spent the rubber money. He spent it lavishly. He built the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Tervuren, a marble palace filled with looted Congolese artifacts. He built the Cinquantenaire Arches, the great triumphal monument that marks the 50th anniversary of Belgian independence. He renovated the Royal Palace at Laeken. He built the Stocklet Palace. He commissioned the gardens of the Royal Greenhouses, 50 acres of glass and tropical plants. He funded the Brussels Conservatory of Music, the Royal Conservatoire, where Eugene Izai taught violin and where, today, students from 40 countries come to study Bach and Debussy and Stravinsky. The Royal Conservatoire is 2. The window was open onto a street paved with stones cut by Belgian masons in 1895. Underneath those stones, somewhere in the layers of European prosperity, are the hands of a 5-year-old girl in a basket on a riverboat in the Congo. Leopold II died on the 17th of December, 1909, at his palace at Laeken of an intestinal obstruction. He was 74. The Belgian crowd at his funeral booed his coffin, booed it. There is a transcript in the Brussels newspaper Le Soir from the next morning. They had finally read, in the previous 5 years, the reports of Edmund Morel and Roger Casement. They knew what their king had done. The state of Belgium, in 1908, had bought the Congo from him personally for 215 million francs. The conservatory he funded continues to operate. The museum he built continues to operate. The Cinquantenaire Arches continue to operate. The Congo, today, has a per capita income of $570 a year. It is one of the poorest countries on Earth. It still produces, by the way, about 80% of the world's cobalt, the metal in the battery of the phone you are watching this video on. The mining is done, in many cases, by children. Some of them lose hands. The hands are no longer collected, but they are still being lost. The conservatories he built still teach Bach. The country he bled has no national musical archive of its own. Both are the legacy. Both are still here. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born in Rio Negro, in the Antioquia region of Colombia, on the 1st of December, 1949. His father was a small farmer. His mother was a school teacher named Hermilda. He had 6 siblings. The family lived in a 2-room house with a tin roof. Pablo was a quiet child. He did well in school until he was 13, when he started skipping classes to make money. His first business, at 14, was sanding the engraved names off stolen gravestones and reselling them to poor families who could not afford new ones. He kept the money in a coffee can buried under the porch. By the time he was 32, he was on the Forbes list of the richest men in the world. By the time he was 38, he was number 7. By the time he was 43, dead on a rooftop in Medellín, he had killed approximately 4,000 people. He had ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing 107 civilians in midair in an attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate who was not even on the plane. He had murdered 3 Colombian presidential candidates. He had murdered a sitting minister of justice. He had murdered the editor of El Espectador for printing an article about him. He had bombed the headquarters of the DAS, the Colombian intelligence agency, killing 52 people in the street outside. He had ordered the Avianca bombing from a yacht while drinking a glass of orange juice. The bomb was hidden under the seat of a man named Alberto Prieto. Prieto was told he was carrying a recording device to spy on a meeting. He was told to push the button when the plane reached cruising altitude. He pushed the button. The plane disintegrated over Soacha. Pablo, on the yacht, asked if the radio had said anything. The radio confirmed. Pablo poured himself another glass of juice. That is the death column. 4,000 confirmed, probably twice that unconfirmed. He flooded the United States with cocaine. At his peak, the Medellín cartel controlled 80% of the world's cocaine supply. He smuggled 15 tons a day at the height of operations. He was, briefly, in 1989, by Forbes magazine's calculation, the 7th richest human being on the planet. $30 billion. He bought a private zoo. He bought 4 hippos that escaped and now live, feral, in the rivers of Antioquia. He bought a submarine. He bought a small island. He bought, at one point, a politician for every level of the Colombian government, from village mayor to the Senate. The other column is a neighborhood. In 1984, the slums on the eastern hillside of Medellín were called Moravia. They were built on a literal landfill. 20,000 people lived in shacks made of cardboard and corrugated tin on top of a mountain of garbage that occasionally caught fire from the methane. Children died of dysentery. Children died of typhoid. The smell, in the wet season, could be tasted 3 kilometers away. The Colombian government had, for 30 years, promised to clear the landfill and rehouse the families. The Colombian government had, for 30 years, done nothing. Pablo Escobar showed up one day in a Land Rover. He walked through the shacks. He shook hands. He listened. Then he hired 400 construction workers, bought a parcel of cleared land in the Manrique district, and built 200 concrete houses with running water, electricity, and tile roofs. He gave the houses away, free, to the poorest families in Moravia. The neighborhood was named, by its residents, Barrio Pablo Escobar. It is still called that today. You can find it on Google Maps. The houses are still standing. The original residents, now grandparents, still live in many of them. They have passed the houses to their children. He did not stop there. He funded soccer fields in the slums of Comuna 13. He paid for the lights in 80 public sports facilities. He paid for the medical bills of poor families across Antioquia, with no application, no paperwork, just a knock on the door and an envelope of cash. He fed, by reasonable estimates, 5,000 families a month at the height of his power. He paid for school uniforms. He paid for funerals. He paid for weddings. He had a phone line in his Hacienda Nápoles compound dedicated to taking calls from poor people who needed help. The line was answered by a secretary who logged each request. Pablo personally reviewed them. Many were granted. He was, simultaneously, ordering the murder of people in the same city. Pablo Escobar was killed on the 2nd of December 1993, the day after his 44th birthday, on a rooftop in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellín. The Search Block, a special unit of the Colombian National Police trained by American DEA and Delta Force operatives, had been hunting him for 16 months. They tracked his cell phone signal. They surrounded the safe house. He came out the back window onto the orange tile roof, barefoot, in a blue t-shirt and jeans. He had a pistol in each hand. He was shot 3 times, once in the leg, once in the back, once behind the right ear. The kill shot, the one behind the ear, has been the subject of 30 years of dispute. The Search Block claimed credit. His own family claimed he had shot himself rather than be captured. Either way, Pablo Escobar bled out on the orange tiles in the late afternoon sun while Hugo Aguilar, the colonel commanding the operation, stood over him and shouted, "Viva Colombia," into a radio. The funeral, 3 days later, was attended by 25,000 people in Medellín. 25,000. The crowd reached into the open coffin. They touched his face. They cut locks of his hair. They prayed to him as if he were a saint. The priest, sweating in the December heat, refused to give the eulogy. A grandmother in the crowd, in a black mantilla, stepped forward and gave it instead. She said, "You killed people, Pablo. You killed many people. But you fed my children. And nobody else fed my children. So tonight, I will light a candle for you. And I will light it tomorrow. And I will light it the night after that." That grandmother was Luz Marina. I met her in 2019 in the doorway of a small concrete house in Barrio Pablo Escobar. The candle was on the windowsill. It was lit. She had lit it that morning. She told me she was going to light it again that night. She told me she had not missed a single night in 26 years. She was 81 years old. She showed me a photograph of her 3 grandsons. They were doctors. They were teachers. They were alive. She said, without Pablo, none of them would have been born. The neighborhood would have burned. The children would have died of typhoid in the landfill. We were nothing, and Pablo made us something. And then he died, and we still pray for him. I asked her how she could pray for a man who killed 4,000 people. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "The same way you Americans pray for the men who built your roads on the backs of slaves, the same way the Belgians pray in the conservatory built on the hands of African children, the same way the Russians read the books that Stalin gave them. We pray because we are alive. We pray because somebody fed us. The price is not ours to forgive. The price was paid by other people. We can only count the gift." I had no answer for her. I still do not. 6 monsters, 6 gifts. The Medellín cartel collapsed within months of Pablo's death. The Soviet Union collapsed 38 years after Stalin's. The Mongol Empire collapsed within a century of Genghis Khan's grave being lost. Mao's China was reformed beyond recognition by Deng Xiaoping within 5 years. The Congo Free State was dissolved a year before Leopold's death. Henry Ford's anti-Semitic newspaper closed in 1927, and Ford issued a public apology under legal pressure that almost nobody believed. The empires fell. The horror fell. The men died. But the Lickbez schools are still open. The $5 day is still the foundation of the American middle class. The principle of religious freedom in the Yasa survived through every legal code that followed it. The Barefoot Doctors model is still saving children today in 14 African countries. The Royal Conservatoire of Brussels is teaching Bach right now, this afternoon, while you watch this video. And in Barrio Pablo Escobar in Medellín, Luz Marina is alive. She is 86. I called her last month. She still lights the candle every night. At 8 o'clock, she told me her great-grandson had just been accepted to medical school in Bogota. He is going to be a doctor. He is going to come back to the neighborhood and treat the children of the people Pablo built houses for. The Medellín cartel collapsed in months. The neighborhood Pablo built is still standing. So is every gift on this list. That is the part history cannot delete. History does not give you permission to hate cleanly. It does not give you permission to love cleanly either. It gives you a ledger, 2 columns, both filled in by the same hand. Your job is not to choose one column and burn the other. Your job is to read both of them, carefully, slowly, with the same eyes, and then to decide every day of your own life which column you are writing in. Next episode, we do this in reverse. The worst things done by history's saints. Mother Teresa.